with so many witnesses and so many layers. And, I got back from CrimeCon, and there are people that are following every bit of this case, and there's others who are like, it just seems so complicated, and they're having trouble breaking through to get into it, to understand what is happening inside the courtroom. And I'll be honest, when I started covering this, and you start coming across all the names and the relationships and everything else of people in the house, it's next level stuff. And it takes a while to really let it sink in, to understand what everyone is saying and what was happening that night and who was involved or who was potentially involved. So why is this so complicated? Is it the lawyers that are making this case more complicated? Is it the way they're trying it? Is the prosecutor, putting in too much redundant evidence? Is he putting in too many photographs? Is he asking questions in a long, convoluted way instead of simply just telling a story? Is he putting in too much evidence? Is he trying to rebut the defense case before he even finishes trying his own case? Well, that could be part of it. The cross-examination obviously is part of it as well, because that's what the defense is doing, building their case about this alleged conspiracy through the cross-examination. They'll have an opportunity to call their own witnesses, but a big part of this defense case, as most defense cases, is challenging witnesses. But in this case, it's not just challenging the witnesses, it's you're trying to prove something else while you're doing it. So yeah, it's part on the lawyers, but it also is it the evidence itself, because of the way the evidence was gathered and what it means. It's not super simple. So there's going to be potentially DNA in this case. You've got pieces of forensic evidence. Then you've got all the eyewitness testimony evidence. And there's just a lot of people involved, because there were people at the bars. There were people in the house. There were people there that morning. There's all the responding officers. You've got the Canton Police, the Massachusetts State Police. So you've got a lot of people, and when people testify, that's evidence. So the evidence is slowing it down as well. But when you think about where we are in all this, and like who's ahead, who's got the advantage, who's winning, personally, I believe anytime a simple case is made more complicated, I think it's advantage defense. And I think the greatest example of that was the O.J. Simpson trial, which took 9 months. 9 months. I mean, a long murder trial like this is going to take a few months. 9 months. So it was a case that became much more, complicated, convoluted, and in the end, it benefited O.J. Simpson and the defense. Now, I don't know what's going to happen here, but what I do know, from my experience as a prosecutor, I always wanted to keep everything simple. Simple. Even if it was the most complicated case in the world, my opening statement would always begin, ladies and gentlemen, this is a simple case. Even though I knew it was a little more complicated than that, but you've got to get them in that mode, and that's not what is happening in Dedham, Massachusetts. So, because it's complicated, we need help. Let's bring in Court TV crime and justice correspondent Matt Johnson, joining us live from outside that complicated courthouse in Dedham, Massachusetts tonight. Matt, great to see you. I bet you didn't think you were going to be there like all summer long, but you may very well be there, because this trial continues. So let's get into what I think is significant in this case, right? This is like the meat of the case, I think, for prosecutors, which is some of the forensic evidence, the cocktail glass, the glass on the bumper, the glass at the scene. Can you explain this to us and what happened today?
Vinny, nice to see you in what is now week 6 in what was supposed to be a 3-week trial. The focus right now is on forensics, and we're hearing from a lot of key witnesses that work with the state over at the crime lab, including Christina Handley. And she was tasked with testing out all of the pieces of glass that were found at the crime scene near John O'Keefe's body, and also glass that was found on Karen Reed's car, her SUV. Take a listen.
The drinking glass from item 3-2 was a physical match for 6 of the pieces from item 7-12, which was glass recovered from the scene, correct?
Correct.
And then the two of the pieces from item 3-3, or one of the pieces, excuse me, piece E from 3-3, which was from the bumper of the defendant's vehicle, was consistent with a piece of clear glass from 7-14, which was found on the ground, correct?
Correct.
So if you're the jury and you're going to have to break this down in a few weeks, Vinny, today they were shown the video again of Karen Reed and John O'Keefe over at the bars here in town. And the one bar where he left with a drinking glass in his hand, that was shown to this jury today. That's how they left the day. Really important stuff. Because remember, at the beginning of the trial, weeks ago, it was Sergeant Michael Lenk that showed them a drinking glass out of a bag, an evidence bag, and it was broken. Well, today they were shown pictures of bits and pieces of glass that were compared to that drinking glass and were a match right there on your screen. So this is what's in the minds of the jurors. That glass shown by Officer Lenk, Sergeant Lenk, and then the pictures that were shown to the jury today tested by that crime scene analyst. They also saw pictures of Karen Reed's bumper. Remember, there were very tiny pieces of glass found in the grooves of her bumper. There were several pieces found there, but Vinny, only one tested positive as a match to that drinking glass in the pieces that were found at 34 Fairview.
Okay, so I'm trying to follow this. So we've got glass on the ground, glass on the bumper, and the cocktail glass. So you're trying to match these all together. So the glass on the ground matches the glass that was broken. The glass on the bumper, is it matching glass on the ground, or is it matching glass from the broken cocktail glass of John O'Keefe?
Inconclusive. It doesn't match, according to the witness on the stand today, pointed out by the defense in cross-examination.
Jurors' heads are spinning with all this. What does this mean? What does this mean? Okay, so let's talk about that cross-examination, because that's a big part of this case. You've got to challenge the evidence. Obviously, the defense is not going to accept everything the prosecution's putting out there, so what are they saying?
You know, they're really just doubling down with building their case in their cross-examination. And the defense is really talking a lot about the police protocol and the procedures of collecting the evidence and the trouble there, as they're pointing out. And they're also really doubling down on the conspiracy theory. And their third-party defense, including the person that they're really pointing the finger at right now, is Trooper Proctor, the lead investigator. Here's what was said in court today.
Trooper Proctor is now finding these pieces over 2 weeks after the smaller pieces were found by Trooper DeChico, correct?
Objection.
Sustained.
February 18th is nearly 3 weeks after January 29th, is it not?
Correct.
This larger piece of red plastic, like the previous two that you just identified, were all found on February 18th, about 3 weeks after January 29th, correct, according to your records?
Correct.
And regarding these last three evidence bags, labeled item number 713, 715, and 716 in February of 2022, from February 8th to the 18th, those were all plastic pieces collected by Michael Proctor, correct?
Correct.
In addition to collecting those plastic pieces on all those different days, Michael Proctor was also the person to hand deliver those last three evidence bags, all on March 14th of 2022, correct?
Correct.
So some of the most important pieces of evidence that the jury has seen pictures of and hearing testimony about, the really large pieces of what match up to be the missing pieces from Karen Reed's SUV, her taillight, they're found at 34 Fairview, but 3 weeks later, after all the other initial searches, and they're found by Trooper Proctor. So his name was mentioned no more than 10 times today. He is still yet to be called. Today I was asked, asking Alan Jackson, well, if the state doesn't call him, are you going to call him? And he said, oh, yeah, I will. Because remember, the judge was asking prosecutors loudly before this trial even started, how are you going to put on a case if you don't call Trooper Proctor?
Yeah. Well, I've seen it done. I've seen, you know, the investigator not testify in trials here through the years at Court TV. It's unusual, but instead of putting the investigator on, they put all the witnesses who told the investigator, you know, or where the investigator got his information from. But most of the time, you kind of put them on to tie the case together at the end, tie up all the loose ends, and tell that story. So that would be fascinating to see how that all plays out. Let's talk about John O'Keefe's clothing. What evidence was found there?
Such a big moment today, and this was actually bombshell testimony, if you ask me, coming from the state crime lab tech, who was tasked with taking a closer look at John O'Keefe's sweatshirt and his clothing, and she ran it under the microscope and saw tiny, tiny fragments of plastic. Take a listen.
The clear plastic from item 7-18.18 was found to be consistent in color and instrumental properties with the examined portion of the clear plastic from the taillight. The examined portions of the red plastic from item 7-18.18 was found to be consistent in color, microscopic appearance, instrumental properties with the examined portions of the red plastic from the taillight, item 3-1. So accordingly, the red plastic from 7-18.18 could have originated from the red plastic from item 3-1, the taillight, or from another source with the same characteristics.
So when Trooper Buchanan was on the stand, it really drove home just how emotional this whole thing is for the victim's family. Peggy O'Keefe, seen in the gallery, she's there each and every day. She was wiping away tears. She had to leave at one point in time during his testimony, because he was talking about the way in which the injuries to John O'Keefe, her son, and he was also, they were showing autopsy photos to this jury. And then there was a big moment where he got the evidence bags. He put his gloves on, he opened them, and he started showing this jury those clothes close up. You could see the stains on them, and it really drove it home for them. But this jury, they missed nothing. Vinny, you've been in the courtroom. They sit directly across from Peggy. They noticed that. They noticed her leaving today. And when she left court, I was out on the courthouse steps today, too, asking her if she's doing okay. She's not talking to the media, but she nodded that she was doing better after that.
Not easy stuff. Not easy stuff. Matt, thanks for making everything a little more simple out of Dedham tonight. We will speak with you again tomorrow. Thank you so much. Let's try to get a little more clarity tonight. Let's bring in forensic criminologist Dr. Laura Petler is with us. Laura, great to see you. Thank you for joining us. I want to start first with what Matt was saying here about, and I think this is extremely important, the tiny fragments that are found on the clothing. But I was listening to the words of the witness, consistent with, could have been. So what's the magic in those words, and how compelling is this evidence to you of these plastic fragments compared to the tail light, the clear and the red?
Hi, Vinny. Great to see you. Thanks for having me tonight. So I was listening to the very same thing. I thought that it was extremely important to discuss the aspect that in science, we say consistent with as opposed to is. And that's kind of the general rule of thumb, no matter if you're talking about bloodstain evidence or you're talking about glass or plastic. So the fact that the analyst said consistent with is the way that she should have presented that. And then also it's important to recognize that she is saying could. So not only could it be Karen Reed's car, it could also be another car like Karen Reed's car, but it's consistent with. So because there's always a chance that something is produced by another mechanism or another source. In science, it's normal for us as investigators and as experts to write in our reports consistent with as opposed to the word is. So this glass or this plastic is consistent with as opposed to did it come from Karen Reed's car? Conclusively, they're saying that it could have. It also could have come from another source that was the same in individual and class characteristics.
Well, let me ask you this, because we know what the defense is. They're going to allege that this evidence is planted. What does your gut tell you about planting tiny fragments on the clothing? And would you expect to find those tiny fragments on the clothing, someone who was there overnight on the lawn and put on the stretcher, and all the things that were done? Does it ring true to you that these fragments would have been there, or is it possible that they could have been planted, tiny fragments of these plastic pieces?
Obviously, Vinny, anything is possible. Do I think that that's likely what happened? No, I don't, because it is normal and it is often that in vehicular impact related incidents that there are all types of trace evidence, like you mentioned earlier at the beginning about DNA or hair or fibers or paint in some cases, but a lot of things transfer. And we use this thing called Locard's exchange principle in forensic science. And what that means is if two things impact each other, if two things come in contact with each other, there's an exchange between them. And that's what we're seeing potentially here in this case. It's very common in impact related type injuries. It depends obviously on a lot of factors, like how fast was the vehicle going and all of the dynamics.
24 miles an hour for 60 feet.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be what prosecutors are going to say. Let me ask you about something else. The cocktail glass is a big part of this as well. So John O'Keefe has a cocktail glass in his hand. And we heard the testimony comparing the glass found on the ground. They were able to match to the broken cocktail glass that was found with John O'Keefe. Then the glass on the bumper was consistent with, at least one piece was consistent with what was found on the ground. But then the expert could not say that the glass on the bumper was consistent with the cocktail glass. And I'm trying to figure that out because it looks like, A equals B, B equals C, but we can't tell if A equals C.
Right. So I think that one of the questions for the analyst would be, what are the size of the samples that you are analyzing? And does your technology and your instrumentation in the lab require a certain percentage or a certain size in order to test the refractory or test some other aspect of the science of it, the chemical composition, because it might be the size that prevents them from properly analyzing it, and therefore they would have to say the sample was too small or insufficient or something like that for their particular instrumentation. So that would be my very first thought of why some of the glass might not be consistent or why it might not have been able to be tested as accurately as the other pieces.
Dr. Laura Pettler, thank you so much for making things make some sense. And again, a trial that is very, very complicated.
I agree with you.
We appreciate it.
Agree with you.
All right,
Thanks, Vinny.
When we come back, we're going to bring in our Trial Insiders Plus coming up next hour.
Madeline Soto had just celebrated her 13th birthday at a party thrown by her family. Then the next day, she did not show up at school and went missing. 2 days later, investigators found hundreds of images on the phone belonging to Madeline's mother's boyfriend, Stephen Stearns. Those images resulted in child sex abuse charges against Stearns. Then 2 days later, Madeline's body was found. And now Stearns is charged with her murder. But the question that still remains is, what did Madeline's mother know? And will she be charged with anything?
is an innocent woman. She didn't do it.
It's a controversial case that's divided a community.
Karen Reed is accused of murdering her police officer boyfriend.
Prosecutors say she ran him over on purpose and left him to die in the cold.
But Reed claims that she's being framed.
It smells suspicious.
After years of legal fireworks, will the truth finally be revealed?
The end game is to figure out who killed John O'Keefe and hold these people responsible.
The killer or cover-up murder trial. Live coverage weekday mornings, only on Court TV.
So as you sit here, none of the items on the bumper were deemed to match the cup, correct?
Correct.
All right.
Okay, this cocktail glass and the pieces and what matches with what, I think it's a big issue. I think it's a really big issue. You just heard the forensic scientists say that the glass on the bumper of Karen Reed's car did not match the drinking glass that was found, the broken drinking glass. So that's not a match. What is a match? Take a look. You've got the drinking glass on the left matches these pieces that are found on the ground. Now, what also matches the pieces found on the ground was from the bumper. So you've got glass from the bumper matching pieces on the ground, but not matching the cocktail glass, but the cocktail glass matching pieces on the ground. I don't understand this. I don't know what the jury's going to make of all this. Can they put the pieces together here? Let's bring in my guests. Joining me tonight, Karen Reed supporter, creator of the Justice for John O'Keefe and Karen Reed Facebook page, Nick Rocco. Also with us, attorney Rick Grundy. He's on the phone, parts unknown tonight. And we also have with us the YouTuber behind the Yellow Cottage Tales channel, Kevin Lenahan. Great to have everyone here. I know we had a little problems getting Rick's Skype hooked up here tonight, so we'll still speak to him, though. You'll hear his voice. Nick, let me start with you. So you've got the glass at the scene, matching glass on the bumper, they said. That's a problem for Karen Reed, isn't it?
Absolutely not, Vinny, and here's why. So the glass on the bumper matches up to no cocktail glass fragments at all. There's only one piece on her bumper that matches up to one piece found on the ground. But guess what? Those two pieces that match was a piece of glass that Michael Proctor found on an undocumented visit to 34 Fairview Road. So you have a piece of glass that Michael Proctor had in his possession match up to a piece on her bumper, but all the other glass doesn't match up to anything on the scene. So that can only mean one thing, that Michael Proctor had that glass in his possession and he put it on the taillight, I'm sorry, not on the taillight, he put it on the bumper, because how does a piece of glass that Michael Proctor finds on the ground at 34 Fairview not only not match up to the bumper glass, it doesn't match up to the cocktail glass, but it matches up to one single piece that's found on her bumper. And there's only one person that had possession of that glass found at 34 Fairview Road, and that's Michael Proctor. So for anybody to say that things weren't planted, this right here is 100% proof that Michael Proctor put that glass on her bumper. And that's the same thing with the little microscopic pieces of taillight that was found on his shirt.
We'll get to the clothing. We'll get to the clothing in a second. I want to deal with the cocktail glass because there's a lot of fragments all over, and we're trying to put the pieces together here. All right, Kevin Lenahan, your thoughts about the cocktail glass and the fragments and what it means and what you took away from this testimony. Got to turn on your volume.
So,
there we go.
Turn it down.
We got it. I think we got it. We didn't have you there initially.
I was just saying, I thought Laura was a fantastic guest, so I hope to see more of her. That was really good. It was confusing today. With the other stuff, I thought maybe today Higgins didn't flip, maybe Nick might flip, but I guess not. But as far as the cocktail one piece was matched, and the other four pieces, it was just inconclusive. So it is a little confusing to the jury, but one piece matched to the cocktail pieces that were found on the ground. As far as Nick saying an undocumented piece, I don't know where that came from, because if it was undocumented, you wouldn't know about it. So obviously it was documented. They just didn't pull out the team and get out the GPS on exactly where it was found, but he documented it. That's why we know about it.
All right, Rick Grundy, the voice of Rick Grundy tonight. What are your thoughts about how this played out in court? Because ultimately, like you were a prosecutor years ago, you've got the burden, you've got to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. Was there a level of clarity in that courtroom for the jury to put the pieces together?
Well, I have to say I don't believe that there was, but jurors are always sharper than you think they are, and it depends how they grab the other pieces and put them together. And I think we talked about this right at the time of opening. The defense took a big bite when they stepped up and said she was framed. You go from being in a position where it's 100% on the prosecution to running the risk of it becoming a 50-50. Is it your story or my story? So we have things like the shoe. You know, we all came out of the opening saying, oh my gosh, where's the shoe? Where's the shoe? Well, I don't know how that came about because the shoe was always there. The shoe was in the pile of snow. So they have the defense has set themselves up well to make a good argument with respect to matching up this glass. But I think in the long run, it's going to be more of an ancillary item than the other physical evidence that's there. I'm not saying that breaks to the favor of either party, but I don't think it's going to be, in all that we see, I don't think it's going to be the telltale piece of evidence.
Okay, let's talk now about John O'Keefe's clothing. And this is, you know, if the jury believes this evidence, this is very compelling evidence that his clothing has tiny fragments consistent with the tail light, tiny pieces of plastic, looking at it, you know, microscopically. Kevin Lenahan, how convincing was this for you?
Well, I mean, it's just one piece of the puzzle, but one thing that we saw today was, I know Nick's going to say that was planted by Michael Proctor, but the way the police have buttoned down, and Yuri Buchanan really testified it well today, is everything is very rigorous process of going into evidence bagged and taped and going into the evidence room that Proctor doesn't have access to. Only the two troopers that are assigned as evidence troopers have access to it. So it's a piece of the puzzle.
I think it's a big piece, Nick. If this jury believes, I mean, you're talking about tiny fragments. How do tiny fragments, both the red and the clear, end up on his clothing? I mean, these are small pieces.
So when I say undocumented visits, what I mean is there's no police report, there's no pictures of where any of this stuff is found. It's just Michael Proctor driving by the scene and finding stuff. We know that he found taillight on February 18th, right? And Michael Proctor was in possession of his clothes for 3 weeks. So he was in possession of his clothes for 3 weeks before he even turned it into evidence. So that's about the same time that he, quote unquote, found more pieces of taillight, okay, at the scene. So take a piece of taillight and go smash it. It does not turn to dust. The only way that you're going to actually get a piece of taillight into any microscopic pieces is to manufacture that and really make sure you break it down. I mean, as far as undocumented visits, yes, it's documented in the sense of this is where we found it, but there's no pictures of it being found. There's no reports of it being found. Just you're taking Michael Proctor's word on it. And one thing that needs to be corrected about the cocktail glass is the bumper the bumper glass that matches up to the glass Michael Proctor found does not match up to the cocktail glass, Kevin. That's a lie. That was proven today in court. That doesn't match to the cocktail. That's a random piece of glass that doesn't match up to anything else. But as far as the shirt with the tail light, I wouldn't put it past. We see right here that this glass was planted. I wouldn't put it past Michael Proctor to sprinkle a little tail light dust on it and call it a day. He had possession of those clothes before he put it into the evidence bag, and we learned that the crime lab didn't receive those clothes until the middle of March, which was 6 weeks after this whole incident happened. So that's my take on that.
Rick Grundy, should prosecutors be worried about the passage of time, the opportunity for evidence here to be tampered with? Is that something that is a problem? Is there something out of the ordinary that you're hearing in the way the clothing was processed, the tail lights, etc.?
So the prosecution should absolutely be concerned about how the entire crime scene was handled. Last time we were together, I mentioned to you, and you know, I used to run a couple of homicide units, and the protocol by law in Massachusetts is an unattended or suspicious death. Local police pardon it off. The state police assigned to the district attorney's office come and take it over. And that clearly didn't happen here. A lot went on prior to state police apparently going in. What the prosecution needs to do, particularly with respect to the evidence you're hearing in the last couple of days, is to separate out the state police, Proctor in particular, from everything I'm hearing, with the crime lab. And the crime lab, you know, who you're hearing from today, they are civilians, they're scientists who are assigned to the crime lab and do their thing in the lab. So this kind of dovetails with what many people on your show have been talking about, is that, you know, the bigger the conspiracy comes, the less likely it is in fact a conspiracy, that all these folks in the crime lab have been duped or are part of it or whatever. So, you know, for the first time, I kind of see a strategy within the prosecution to have kind of introduced all the people that they're alleging may be murderers, and now kind of buckle down and get through the police and get to the forensic folks, who I think they view as their strongest allies in presenting and proving their case. You know,
Gotcha. I got to cut you off there, Rick, just because we've got to get to a quick break here. But everyone's coming back. That's the good news. When we come back, we're going to talk about the defense theory. Who is their target?
Okay, you're aware he was beaten up by Brian and Colin Albert. I mean, we're all in on the same joke, right? My tail light is cracked and John was pulverized.
That was Karen Reed when she was arrested and charged with murder, rearrested and charged with murder. And there, she seems to be pointing the finger at Brian and Colin Albert as being the ones who murdered, killed John O'Keefe. Now, when she said Brian, did she mean Brian Albert, who's the homeowner? Did she? And she obviously meant Colin Albert. But then there's also Brian Higgins in the middle. So who exactly does the defense believe is responsible for this killing? Is it Colin Albert, Brian Higgins, or Brian Albert? Brian Higgins, during the course of this trial, when I was at CrimeCon, a lot of people were talking about Brian Higgins, partly because of these flirty text messages with Karen Reed.
Defendant responded, "You're hot." I responded, "Are you serious or messing with me?" Defendant responded, "No, I'm serious." I responded, "Failing is mutual. Is that bad? How long have you thought that?" Defendant responded, "Are you okay driving? You don't want to stay here." I responded back, "I'm fine. I have an office at the PD. You didn't answer the question." And then it starts to say, defendant said, "Rather you stay here."
And then there's also Brian Higgins getting rid of his phone.
In September of 2022, you were served with a preservation order for your phone, were you not?
Yes.
After September of 2022, you never received anything in writing that canceled or lifted that preservation order, correct?
That's correct.
After September of 2022, you made the decision to dispose of your phone without consulting anybody about the decision to throw out your phone, correct?
Yes.
But then we also saw this photo of Colin Albert's knuckles. 17-year-old Colin Albert. You could see them. They're scarred up, have some scabs on them, on the knuckles. So is it Colin Albert? Here was his explanation for what happened to his hand.
How'd you get those injuries? Mr. Albert, we can analyze up.
I was at a party, my house party, my senior year, and I remember it being icy out, and it was kind of like a steep hill of a driveway, and I was walking up the driveway, and I slipped down the driveway, and I tried to catch myself, but I had something in my left hand, so I had tried to brace myself with my right hand, and I ended up sliding a little bit down the driveway.
What'd you have in your left hand?
If I remember, it was either my phone or a beverage.
All right, so let me try to get some clarity here. We've got our trial insiders back with us. Nick Rocco, who do you believe is the target here of the defense as being the real so-called killer?
I don't think there's one specific person that they're going to try to put the blame on. I truly believe that all three of those people had something to do with John O'Keefe's murder. As far as Colin Albert, taking on John O'Keefe by himself, I don't think that would be possible. I think his uncle and Brian Higgins clearly had something to do with that. And between all the deleted phone calls, the butt dials, the throwing out of the cell phones, Colin Albert lying, saying he's never been in a fight before. Now there's 3 videos. I'm sure more are going to circulate of him being in fist fights. And also the fact that Brian Higgins claimed he didn't know that John and Karen were coming back to the house. Yet at around 12:22, he sent John a text and said, "Where are you?" Almost insinuating like, all right, find out where he is so we know when he's coming. So I don't think it's going to be one specific person that they're going to try to say, this is the killer. I think all 3 of them had something to do with it.
All right, Kevin Lenahan, which of these do you believe is the most problematic for the prosecution in front of this jury in the way the testimony and evidence has been presented so far?
Well, you get another photo there that was presented at trial, if you can find it, that shows from a week earlier that Colin's knuckles are clean and taken at a party about a week after the 29th when John died. So I think you're running out of room here to hang a conspiracy on, because as you saw today, the SUV arrived at 5:31. It went into the garage at 5:36. We have video of it now, and the entire Mass State Police CERT team was digging by 5:41, so there's just no room to put it there. So you're running out of anywhere to really hang any kind of a conspiracy theory here, if you ask me.
Rick Grundy, is it problematic if you've got witnesses who the defense is sort of implicating as doing something wrong, and you've got people wondering why phones are being destroyed?
So, yeah, is it a problem? Sure. But I think what the defense needs to do is retreat to some degree from their it was a frame job, because they're putting to the jury at that point in time, we're going to prove something to you. They don't have to. All they got to do is get that reasonable doubt. And all these little things or these unexplainable things, they play really well into that argument. But if you've got the jury sitting there thinking, got to prove it to me, just like the Commonwealth. Obviously, they'll hear the instructions, and the judge will tell them that's not the case. But if in their mindset, you didn't deliver what you told me, or it can come back on you. And as far as the 3 of them is concerned, I'm not aware of anything that's come forth as a motive, with the exception of Higgins and the love triangle, which I would say is a very light motive, but maybe that's what they would hang their hat on. But again,
Rick, let me ask you this, because this is a significant thing. Trooper Proctor, is it possible prosecutors don't call him? And in your cases, have you ever not called the lead investigator while you were prosecuting someone for murder?
Sure. When I tried a case, I would limit the police involvement as far as testimony is concerned to the bare essentials, usually 1 to open, 1 to close, and whatever was anybody that was absolutely necessary with respect to the piece of discovery of evidence. You want the jury to be at least feel that they're putting it together on their own, and opposed as far as just having a police officer get up there and say he's not a witness, he's an investigator, and you want the jury to actually be the investigator. And then the fact of the matter is, there's some police officers that are excellent at testifying, not testifying, presenting evidence in a convincing manner. And those are the people I'm going to rely upon again and
All right.
again. So
we're out of time, Rick. I know you can't see my face right now, but we're out of time. Appreciate it. Nick Rocco, Kevin Lenahan, Rick Grundy, awesome job tonight. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow. When we come back, I will reveal something else you need to know tonight. Plus, coming up next hour.
Wade Wilson's face is covered with tattoos. It's so bad that he has asked for makeup to cover them up during his death penalty murder trial. Wilson is accused of strangling 2 women to death, and now a jury in Florida will sit in judgment and decide if he's a killer. If they do, they will next decide whether he lives or dies.
Is there anything about his face that would cause you just to say, oh, he's guilty?
On the next episode of Accomplice to Murder.
This was a multi-generational family plan to eliminate the patriarch.
Buried beneath a tomato patch.
There were 5 people charged with the murder of 1 person.
He was abusive.
He said, I swore since I was 6 years old that I'd kill that man.
Accomplice to Murder with Vinnie Politan. All new episode, Sunday night, 8/7 Central.
Only on Court TV. Welcome back. Time to reveal something else you need to know tonight. Take a look at the big board. And who do we have? I don't know if you recognize her. It's been a few years. That's Amanda Knox. She was back in Italy, back in a criminal court, and got convicted again. This time for slander, for accusing the owner of the bar that she worked at for the murder that she was originally convicted of and then exonerated for. Slander in Italy is a crime. She apparently represented herself. So, as it usually goes, she did not win. But the good news for Amanda Knox, she's not going back to prison. She served 3 years for something she didn't do, so they gave her credit for that. So Amanda Knox will be able to, I guess, I don't know, go take a look at the Coliseum or something. Anyhow, when we come back, more video involving the Madeline Soto case.
Madeline Soto had just celebrated her 13th birthday at a party thrown by her family. Then the next day, she did not show up at school and went missing. 2 days later, investigators found hundreds of images on the phone belonging to Madeline's mother's boyfriend, Stephen Stearns. Those images resulted in child sex abuse charges against Stearns. Then